Hi, everybody, and welcome to Global Go's Fireside Chat series, where I and my colleagues from Global Go will go through various states and basically tell you about getting a license there and the opportunities around licensing and challenges. So today you have talking to you, myself, Ryan Fingerhut. I am the Director of Client Services for Global Go, and my partner and esteemed colleague, Simone Sandoval, who is our Director of Licensing and Compliance. Today we are going to speak about the state of Florida. Now, the state of Florida is a very special state in the cannabis sector. It's got 22 million residents and 22 licensed operators for the entire state. That's 1 million residents per licensed operator. Florida is a medical only state, but it's also the nation's, and if not the world's, largest medical market, with over $1 billion in sales in the first 6 months of 2022, according to Headset. Now, as I said, Florida is an extremely small licensing district with only 22 current licensed operators. These operators have a couple of unique features about them, which is how the state has grown to the size it has with just so few operators, but we'll be going into that here very shortly. And of course, the main reason that everybody's so excited about Florida, the main reason we're talking about it is because there is a licensing round expected to come up in early 2023, and that is what we're going to be talking about today. So with that, I'm going to move on to some of the questions that we've solicited from our viewership and our readership. And I'm going to be going through some of the top questions that we were asked. So the first is, when is the application due? Now, the timeline for the Florida application has not yet been released, but an announcement for various batching cycles did come out in December of last year, 2022. And so if that follows along with the timelines from the last application round, we expect for there to be an announcement any day now in the next couple weeks. And we also expect the submission deadline for that application to come out in May. In fact, the application and the scoring rubric is already out. The only thing left to be announced is when the application submission window itself will be announced. Simone, would you like to take the next question?
Great. That kind of leads into our next question, which is how many licenses are available in this batching cycle? Now, as Ryan stated, batching cycles are going to be announced per the application window of rules, which we expect to be released within the next several weeks. But we expect for this round to be 22 licenses available, and that's based on the number of qualified patients in Florida, which is hovering around 780,000. From a 2017 rule that basically says that every time 100,000 patients is reached, 4 more licenses will be issued.
Yes. And so, of course, you heard that, and I just want to reiterate, the number of licenses in the state of Florida is doubling from 22 to potentially 44. As Simone said, that has to do with with the law itself, which specifically requires the state of Florida issues 4 additional medical marijuana treatment centers, MMTCs, they call them, licenses within 6 months of every 100,000 patients. Now, why are they supposed to issue 4 at a time, and yet we're looking at potentially 22? Well, as Simone mentioned, that also has to do with a court case, Floor Grown versus the Florida Department of Health, where Floor Grown sued on the requirement that the state has that all licenses be fully vertically integrated. Floor Grown said that that was not in compliance with what was passed by the constituency of Florida when they legalized medical cannabis. The court, unfortunately or fortunately, came down and said that Floor Grown, we're going to keep with the vertical process. We are going to consider that to be constitutional. And most importantly, they lifted a multi-year stay on new licensing, which is why we are looking at a rather large tranche of licensing coming around this time. I don't expect that we'd ever see a tranche quite this large ever again in the state because frankly, this case has been decided and I don't see too many similar lawsuits coming out in the near future.
Got
Simone,
it.
yeah.
Right. And because of that, a lot of interest is occurring right now in Florida. So let's get into, who is eligible for a license in Florida. Basically, anyone who can provide documentation that your applicant entity has been registered to do business in Florida for the past 5 consecutive years. Anyone who does not have a disqualifying criminal offense. For example, that can be fraud, perjury, or a violent crime. And there is a list of enumerated crimes that you should compare against if you're not sure. Anyone who doesn't have a current ownership interest in an MMTC. And then you'll also need to secure a medical director, a physician, MD, osteopath, who's licensed in Florida and who meets certain training requirements specifically for the cannabis industry. And also that person cannot write medical marijuana scripts. That's also important. And finally, anyone who can pay the very large application fee of $146,000 and, can fund a 2-year operation and scale it in the state of Florida.
And Simone, I just want to kind of call out for everybody, just to be clear. So there is no residency requirement for the actual owners of a Florida entity.
Correct.
Yes. Okay. Just the entity itself has to be a Florida entity.
Correct.
From the previous 5 years. Okay. All right. So the next question is going to be, what licenses are available in the state? And that's a pretty normal question in any state but Florida. So Florida is one of the few states that has vertically integrated licenses. What's unique to Florida is that those vertical integration is required. That means that any licensee must cultivate, manufacture, distribute, and retail their own cannabis. Unlike other vertical states, there is no wholesale market in the state of Florida. Unless you have special permission from the Office of Medical Marijuana Use, the OMMU, you are not allowed to get cannabis flower or manufactured goods from any other cannabis licensee in the state. Instead, you must cultivate and manufacture your own products, and then you must retail sell them at your own facilities. So that's pretty unique about Florida. It also is a major driver for why Florida MMTCs are so incredibly profitable. They're all vertically integrated. But 2, it also means that if you want to get into Florida, if you want to apply for a license, you have to be prepared within a 2-year period to stand up the entire vertical and do so at a scale capable of at least arguably servicing a significant amount of the patients in the state. And that, of course, is a pretty significant challenge. So, Simone, what do you think an application like that's going to look like?
It's a very detailed, lengthy application that was released last December, and it's meant to weed out those who are unqualified to manage and finance this type of statewide vertical integration operation within such a short amount of time. Now, there are 16 main sections to the application, and with the heaviest weight going to demonstrating technical ability and experience in medical marijuana operations, as well as highly regulated industries. Applicants will also be evaluated on certified financials and the amount of secured funding and infrastructure at the time of submission. Now that's important. You have to show that at the time of submission. So in other words, experience, capital, and real estate must be secured at the time of application to be competitive, and that investment must be able to scale a statewide enterprise within 2 years of licensure. That's a pretty difficult application lift to make.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, of course, the next question becomes, so if I'm looking at that kind of application, how am I going to maximize out my points and maximize out my potential to win one of these very coveted licenses? So if you look at the application, there are 16 separate sections, 12 of which are going to be scored and award points. The other 4 are pass-fail. You either check the box or your application gets disregarded. Of the 12, there's a couple of, let's call them themes that tend to come up. As Simone said, the first is securing infrastructure. As those of us who are familiar with the state of Florida know, Florida's had a bit of an issue with licensees who win a license and then don't actually begin operations or operate at scale. In fact, if you look at the current 22 licensees, only about 12 of them are really what I would call a statewide operation. So Florida is very focused on that. They want to see infrastructure secured. They award more points for infrastructure secured. So this is your cultivation, your manufacturing facility, not just blueprints and plans, but actually having the property secured, actually being partially built, if not entirely built. This also goes with retail locations. As I mentioned, the Florida MMTC license is a license to serve the entire state. Having multiple retail locations strategically placed throughout the state, that's going to score you more points than if you just have plans or, even proposed properties. Now, next, as I mentioned, it's a vertical license. So you need an impressive team, but not just an impressive team in cultivation, not just an impressive team in manufacture, not just an impressive team in retail. You need an impressive team that can do all of it. And further, you need that impressive team to have real world experience, whether that be scientific and degrees for, say, manufacturing, or whether that be real world experience in regulated cannabis, and especially medical marijuana cannabis. Let me reiterate this as well. The state of Florida very much is a medical cannabis state, medical marijuana. They want your medical director to have a good deal of experience when it comes to treatment of patients, when it comes to pharmaceutical manufacture. They also want all of your operating people to, as much as possible, understand how to treat medical marijuana as a medication and really focus in on the efficacy. Finally, and this kind of rolls into what we mentioned, well-funded. The state requires audited financials. The state counts more points for money that's already in a bank account owned by the entity or in a note that's promised to the entity versus proposed funding. And the state really will award more points for having the deep pockets necessary to stand up a statewide, fully vertical operation than for people who, say, are only partially funded or, don't have solid commitments as far as the funding goes. And of course, that leads right into, what are the costs for this application?
I was going to say, speaking of funding, so the associated fees here, as I stated before, there's 146,000 non-refundable application fee. That's a very steep fee from the last general round, and it's actually one of the highest in the country. 125,000 used to be the highest of Rhode Island's application. That's the same fee that we saw in the Pigford round. And also now, if you're selected, and this was passed just last year, there's going to be a $1.3 million license renewal fee every 2 years of operation. So that'll be due after 2 years of operation. And that's based on a formula that the state created on how much it costs the state to implement and maintain the medical marijuana program. So pretty high license fees happening this year.
Yikes. 1.3 million is definitely quite a price tag. And I think that's worth noting. So aside from being one of only 44 and one of the most populous states to be able to deliver medical marijuana, the question becomes what products you're allowed to sell so you can make that $1.3 million for the state. So the state started off with sublinguals, topicals, suppositories, and inhalables like vaporizers. After a bit of a constitutional fight, flowers and other unprocessed smokables was allowed. And then finally, after a bit of a delay in the regulations, edibles such as lozenges and baked goods were added. So the vast majority of cannabis products are available in the state and are available for you to sell. It should be noted that edibles in Florida require that they're produced in a GMP certified facility, and that your plan to get your facility GMP certified is actually part of the application. So as I said, still a very medical state, still very high expectations for your products, even though they do allow the vast majority of them.
All right, so going into the next question, what is a citrus preference? So this was designed actually to help ailing citrus farmers who have been hurt in the current struggling industry. And so special preference in this round will be given for up to 2 applicants that own a facility previously used for citrus processing in Florida, and then will use that facility for medical marijuana processing. Now, applicants will need to submit documentation to ensure they qualify. And again, only the top 2 scoring applicants who do qualify will be awarded additional points. Anything else different about this application that we should be aware of, Ryan?
Well, there is, but I just real quick, I just want to reiterate on that last point you said there, Simone. So the citrus preference is really more of a tiebreaker. It's not something that awards points immediately. It's something that only awards points if you're in the final, if you're one of the final two, correct?
Correct.
Great. Okay. Just want to make that understood because I know there's a lot of questions around the citrus preference, which frankly is fairly confusing. So then finally, what is special about this new upcoming 2023 round? So one of the things that's going to be unique about this 2023 round is it's actually the second round since the end of the Flora-grown lawsuit. When the Flora-grown lawsuit ended last year in 2022, the state decided to move forward with what they called their Pickford BFL round. Now, this was the state of Florida's social equity round. It was only available to people who had been plaintiffs and won in either Pickford or BFL versus the United States Department of Agriculture. Basically, there used to be a lending program for small farmers in the United States, and it was found that the U.S. Department of Agriculture was not giving those out to farms owned by Black farmers. There was a class action lawsuit about that, and so the state of Florida decided that the victims of that particular, federal racism would be given a special opportunity to go after a license. That round happened last year in 2022. So the license has already been awarded. There's a few number of people out there who did apply, I think somewhere in the teens, and they are all being invited back for the general application round. The state is putting together a program by which the application fees that they pay, that the former applicants paid, will be put forward and applied to this application round. Now those applications probably will need a little bit of work, as the questions that were asked for that application license were not exactly the same, but they were very, very similar. I would say probably about 85 to 90% there. So these applicants will probably have not only the advantage of not having to repay that $146,000 fee, but a lot of the work that they've already done on the previous Pickford BFL application will probably be reusable for this application, though, of course, not all of it. And yeah, exactly. So very exciting time in Florida, very exciting time to be a cannabis entrepreneur if you have the ability and the scale to go after one of these very coveted, though, and very lucrative, though very challenging licenses. And I know Simone and myself are very excited to speak with, talk with, and work on some of these applications with you all. So the number and contact information is going to be on the following page for Global Go. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions or would like to have a discussion with me and Simone about your potential opportunity to move forward in the state. Thank you very much.
Thank you.